Mr. Koppa, thanks for coming here in Bloomberg studio.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
Well, we know that the IMF just approved an extended fund facility for Mongolia today. So what was your first reaction?
First reaction was one of relief that the protracted finish to the negotiations had finally concluded, and now things can move ahead. And it's very good news.
So the total package is 5.5 billion, and 2 billion will be spent on projects, as the finance minister said, but there aren't any project that's ready to go. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, there are some projects that may need some funding that would be coming from the Mongolian side, that the private sector or other partners might not be able to provide. For example, we still desperately need that the railway from the coal mines. We have booming conditions, and we're effectively leaving money on the ground by having these more expensive trucks waiting in long queues. So clearly, that's an immediate one. And then, of course, the power plant in the South Gobi to not have to continue to import the energy from China. OT has just renewed another 4 years purchase agreement, because obviously it will take 4 years to put up a power plant, but the sooner that's started, the better. And there may need to be some of that funding, because money's from the ADB or let's say the Japanese or the World Bank. Some of that could be used for these projects. So those are two kind of easy ones. Of course, we have a lot of other more ambitious projects that relate to the STEP road, now that being potentially merged in with the One Belt, One Road initiative, and some funding that would be coming through that organization. But there's always going to be a local portion that will have to be contributed, and if as policy the government wants to maintain an ownership or control of these, they're going to have to put in some money or provide some funding. And I think that's kind of perhaps where these numbers come. It's not going to all be able to be spent right away. These projects need to be thought through. They need to be properly structured, and so this is to be obviously over a period of a couple of years before I think these monies would be drawn. Of course, some of the money, approximately $2 billion, is in the renewal and extension of the swap facility, which is more of a liquidity issue, and of course some of the monies from the ADB and World Bank earmarked loans are earmarked for budget deficit funding. The key thing, though, is what it does is it will help other monies come in. The bond market has reacted very favorably after the handshake agreement on the EFF. Now that it's concluded, that should be maintained and continued. From the business community standpoint, as BCM representing the business community, what we want are conditions that will keep investment coming in and make business easier. Imports, a stable currency is one of those. We've seen the currency stabilize since the EFF agreement was, as again, tentatively agreed. On the anticipation that there would be a cushion of funds through the 440 million of the IMF facilities. That was enough to stabilize and increase the value of the currency by 2 or 3%. So what the business community wants is fairly predictable and stable exchange rates. Clearly, devaluation has hurt a number of businesses that are involved in selling imported goods. Imports, the export market has benefited a little bit from a week or two group, but clearly it's the stronger demand on commodity prices that's helping, and that's more important.
So we know that the IMF program aims to stabilize the economy and also restore confidence and also pave the way to economic recovery. So in last, we were cooperate with IMF in 2009, after the global economic crisis. You know that. So how can we implementing that program successfully this time, and what's your advice on that?
Well, last time the Mongolia was able to exit the program or repay the financing sooner. It was more of a short-term facility. This is an extended funding with for the IMF monies will have 10-year tenor. But there's always, I think, a wish that the government would not have to continue to remain in the program any longer than necessary. Last time in 2009 and 10, we saw in 2010 some tremendous events. We had the start of the phase one investment by Oya Tolgoi, which was bringing in that in 2010 $1.5 billion or something in foreign direct investment on an economy which was then 5 billion GDP. We also had coal prices impacted favorably when there were floods in Queensland, both in 2010 and 11. So that created a liquidity position that enabled the government to pay it quickly. Now, if we have this kind of an export boom as we're seeing for the next 2 years, then it's possible that an earlier exit might be achieved. Of course, but it's important, I think, that the country take advantage of the loan programs that are being offered in parallel with the IMF EFF facility, which is to help finance infrastructure, and obviously in the next couple of years there will have to be budget deficits. The business community doesn't like to see the budget revenues supported by too much tax. That we understand they had to come to some terms to try to show that we could live within a reasonable deficit, but it would be better if tax wasn't the way to do it, because that's a negative incentive to new investment and some potential new foreign investment. Mongolia has been seen as a very low tax environment. Now that might be lost.
Just as you said, it would have been better if it's not coming from all tax. What's your point of view on this? Some of the taxes are being enforced on the private sector mostly, and some of them just regular citizens are going to pay so much. And auto industry and all those moving so quickly upon the news. What do you think would be the best way to kind of like avoid too much taxing, or maybe taxing on a different sector? I don't know.
Well, I think there's always been a feeling that a collection of existing tax rates would be one way to help. There's a feeling that there is revenues that aren't collected, but which are due. I think the forecast on which these budgets had to be made were fairly conservative in terms of the economic outlook. We may be surprised that the results will be exceeding the expectations. That is to say, GDP growth was projected to be 1% or 2% this year. We've already seen 4% annualized growth in the first quarter. The export surplus is, if that continues with the trend, we'll have a very good year. That will create more royalties and potentially more profits for mining companies and other exporters that would increase taxes even without having to touch the rates. So this gets into more of course, much of the political issue. I still think that there will be there will need to be some rethinking of some of that, although I'm not going to speak for the government on that. But we would, from the business community standpoint, we believe some of the taxes that have been proposed or started are a little bit too much too soon.
So I'd like to mention about the banking system here in Mongolia. One of the main pillar of the program is a banking system of Mongolia. So what's the medium and maybe long-term impact of the IMF program, that sector?
Well, the IMF program involves support for an assessment of the banking system, both to support the central bank in its supervisory capacities and potentially some tweaks to the banking law. But from the commercial banks, the IMF programs essentially are premised on the fact that in order for an economy to recover, it need to have the banks participating. And if the banks are too burdened with non-performing loans or other problems that have been a result of the weak economy, they've got to be helped so they can be able to lend. There will be an asset quality review during the summer conducted by outside auditing firms that have yet to be named, and that will focus on looking at the asset quality of the banks. And then there'll be potentially some need to have stronger capitalization of the banks in general or some particular banks. So the banks will be under a bit of a microscope for the next few months, and at the same time, the sector is changing to some new methodologies in how assets are valued, and so we're going to be going through a period of adjustment. The net result will be that likely the banks will have to increase their capital bases.
It's really nice to talk to you, and thanks for coming.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir.